Admiral of the Empire stared at the holographic display showing the blue-green planet designated as Target 779. The third planet from a yellow star, unremarkable in most ways except for one critical detail. It harbored an intelligent species that had somehow managed to develop primitive space travel without the guidance of a superior civilization. They had ruled the galaxy for over 3,000 cycles, their crystalline ships and energy-based weapons ensuring swift victory over any species foolish enough to resist their expansion. Every encounter followed the same pattern: initial contact, demonstration of superior technology, demand for submission, and inevitable conquest when the primitives refused to bow. "Admiral, our scouts report the humans have detected our probe ships," reported Commander, her four eyes flickering with what might have been amusement. "They've sent what appears to be a communication attempt." Mandibles clicked in annoyance. "Translated." The bridge fell silent as the alien transmission filled the air. The voice was rough, spoken in the barbaric tones typical of carbon-based vocal cords. "Unknown vessels, this is Earth Defense Command. You have entered our solar system without permission. State your intentions immediately or withdraw." Several officers released chittering sounds that passed for laughter among the audacity of these creatures never failed to amuse. A species that had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel was demanding explanations from the masters of the galaxy. "Send the standard ultimatum," commanded, settling back into his crystalline command chair. "Unconditional surrender within one solar rotation or face complete annihilation." The reply came faster than expected, carrying an edge that made even the veteran admiral pause. "This is Admiral Sarah of the United Earth Defense Force. Your ultimatum is rejected. We suggest you reconsider your position before you make a mistake you cannot undo." The bridge erupted in clicks and chittering. Commander's wings buzzed with agitation. "Admiral, surely they cannot be serious? Our records show they have barely 500 ships, most of them primitive chemical propulsion vessels. Our single fleet carries 2,000 advanced warships." Study the tactical display. The humans had indeed arranged their pathetic fleet in a defensive formation around there. Small, stubby vessels that looked more like flying metal boxes than proper starships. No elegant curves, no crystalline energy channeling systems, just crude metal and ceramic armor plating. Their weapons appeared to be kinetic projectiles and primitive atomic fusion devices. "Perhaps they require a demonstration," the Admiral mused. "Target their largest moon. A single planet cracker missile should show them the futility of resistance." The order was transmitted, and moments later, a sleek destroyer launched a weapon capable of shattering continental plates. The missile streaked through space, its energy signature bright enough to blind primitive sensors. It struck the human moon designated as Luna with devastating force. The explosion was magnificent, visible even from the outer planets. A quarter of the moon's surface vanished in a sphere of superheated plasma. Debris scattered in all directions, some pieces large enough to threaten the human itself. "Surely now they will see reason," Commander observed, watching the destruction with satisfaction. The human response arrived within minutes. "Luna Base to Earth Command. We've lost sections 7 through 12, initiating emergency protocols, all personnel to fallback positions." Then came a transmission that would haunt Admiral for what little remained of his life. "Admiral to all Earth Defense Forces. The enemy has destroyed civilian populations on Luna. As of this moment, we are at war. Execute Protocol 777. Show them what happens when you hurt our people." The tactical display suddenly erupted with new contacts. Not hundreds of ships, but thousands. They appeared to materialize from empty space itself, as if the humans had somehow hidden an entire armada in dimensions they couldn't detect. The new vessels were different from the defensive fleet, larger and more aggressive in design. They moved with a precision that spoke of advanced artificial intelligence coordination. "Impossible," whispered Commander. "Where did they come from?" Before anyone could answer, the human ships opened fire. But these weren't the primitive kinetic weapons they had expected. Beams of coherent energy lanced out, followed by projectiles that moved at significant fractions of light speed. The lead cruiser simply ceased to exist, its shields overwhelmed in milliseconds. Admiral's confidence began to crack. Evasive maneuvers, return fire. The battle that followed everything the thought they knew about warfare. The humans fought with a coordination that suggested their ships were extensions of a single mind. They used tactics that seemed to anticipate responses before they were even made. Most disturbing of all, their weapons technology was not primitive at all. The human admiral's voice cut through the chaos of battle. "Fleet, this is your final warning. Withdraw from our system immediately, or we will demonstrate why every other species in this galaxy has chosen peaceful contact over invasion." "Every other species?" Blood chilled. What does she mean? His question was answered when the tactical display revealed something that shattered his understanding of galactic politics. Ships bearing the signatures of a dozen different alien civilizations dropped out of hyperspace around the human fleet, not as enemies, but as allies. All species they had conquered or intimidated into submission over the centuries. They flew alongside human vessels as equals. Commander's voice cracked with disbelief. "Admiral, we're receiving surrender demands from our own subject worlds. The system has declared independence. They are ordering our garrisons to withdraw. It's spreading across the entire sector." The humans had done something they had thought impossible. They had united the galaxy's oppressed species into a coalition. But how? They were the supreme military power. They had crushed every rebellion for 3. Admiral's transmission provided the answer. "You made a fundamental error in your calculations, Admiral. You assumed that military might alone determines the victor in war. You never considered that there might be other forms of strength." As if to demonstrate her point, the human fleet began to execute maneuvers that should have been physically impossible. Ships accelerated beyond what their engines should have been capable of, turned at angles that should have their crews, and coordinated attacks across distances that should have introduced fatal communication delays. "They're using some form of quantum entanglement communication," reported the science officer, his voice filled with awe and terror. "And their ships. Admiral, I'm detecting gravitational manipulation technology. They're not just using engines for movement, they're bending space-time itself." The realization hit Admiral like a physical blow. The humans hadn't been primitive when they arrived. They had been testing their defenses, studying their enemy, and preparing for a war that had been inevitable from the moment first contact was made. "How long?" he asked quietly. "Admirals, how long have they known about us? How long have they been preparing?" The science officer's antennae drooped with defeat. "Based on the sophistication of their technology, decades, Admiral, maybe longer." Another impossibility. The intelligence network spanned the galaxy. Nothing happened without their knowledge. Yet somehow an entire species had developed beyond their understanding while remaining completely hidden until the moment they chose to reveal themselves. The human fleet pressed their attack with methodical precision. They weren't angry or vengeful. They were simply efficient. Each ship was disabled rather than destroyed when possible, crews evacuated and taken prisoner rather than left to die in space. It was almost worse than the alternative. The humans were demonstrating mercy toward an enemy that had shown them none. "Admiral, the flagship Eternal Glory is reporting catastrophic system failures," Commander announced, her voice hollow with shock. "The humans are using some kind of directed electromagnetic pulse that's shutting down our crystalline matrices. Our weapons can't maintain coherence, our shields are fluctuating, and our engines." She didn't need to finish. Through the bridge's transparent aluminum viewports, Admiral could see the pride of the fleet drifting helplessly, its once brilliant crystalline hull now dark and cold. "They studied our technology," he realized aloud. "They learned our weaknesses and designed counters for everything we had." The final transmission from Admiral was delivered with calm professionalism. "Fleet, you are defeated. Surrender immediately, and your crews will be treated according to the rules of civilized warfare. Continue fighting, and you will be destroyed without further warning." Admiral looked around his bridge at officers who had never known defeat, their expressions ranging from shock to terror to something approaching respect for their human opponents. The tactical display showed the brutal truth. 3/4 of the fleet was either destroyed or disabled. The remainder faced odds that made victory impossible. For the first time in 3,000 years, an admiral spoke the words of surrender. "Human fleet, this is Admiral, we surrender, all ships stand down." As weapons powered down across the battlefield, Admiral contemplated the magnitude of their error. They had declared war on a species they thought was primitive, only to discover they had attacked the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. The humans had not only been ready for them, they had been waiting. The question that would haunt his remaining days began to form. If the humans were this powerful, this prepared, this united with other species, why had they allowed the Empire to exist at all? What game were they playing, and what did it mean for the future of galactic civilization? Outside the viewport, human ships moved with purpose and confidence, their crews beginning the process of establishing control over a battle that had been decided before it began. The age of supremacy was over, ended in a single engagement by a species they had fatally underestimated. But this was only the beginning of Admiral's education in human nature. The real lessons were yet to come. The prisoner transport vessel Harmony was unlike anything Admiral had expected from a military ship. Instead of the cold, utilitarian design typical of vessels, the human ship featured comfortable quarters, recreational facilities, and what the humans called a cultural exchange center. It was as if the humans had built their prison ships specifically for education rather than punishment. 3 weeks had passed since the surrender, and every day brought new revelations that shattered his understanding of galactic civilization. He sat in what the humans generously called his guest quarters, watching a historical documentary that Captain Maria Santos had suggested he review. The documentary began with images of Earth as it had been during the Empire's rise to power. But this wasn't the primitive world their intelligence had described. Cities sprawled across continents, connected by transportation networks that moved billions of people with efficiency that rivaled infrastructure. Orbital installations ringed the planet like a geometric crown, each one larger than most space stations. "Impossible," he muttered, watching fusion-powered vessels traverse the solar system with casual ease. According to records, humans had only achieved interstellar flight within the last 50 cycles. The door chimed softly, and Captain Santos entered with her characteristic smile. She was a small human by their standards, her dark hair streaked with gray that indicated significant age by human reckoning. Yet she moved with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "Watching the historical overview?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. "I thought you might find it interesting. Most species do when they learn the truth." "The truth?" His mandibles clicked with agitation. "Your species has been deliberately concealing your development for. Our intelligence networks showed no evidence of this level of advancement." Captain Santos nodded as if she had expected the question. "Your intelligence networks showed exactly what we wanted them to show. Admiral, may I ask you a question? In all your centuries of conquest, did you ever wonder why so many species seem to develop along similar technological paths?" The question caught him off guard. Similar paths? Energy weapons, crystalline computing matrices, gravitational manipulation for faster-than-light travel. The fundamental technologies that every advanced species seems to discover in roughly the same order. Her expression grew thoughtful. Didn't it seem coincidental that so many different species would independently arrive at identical solutions? Felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. "You're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating a fact." Captain Santos activated a holographic display that showed the galactic map as knew it, then overlaid it with information that made his blood freeze. For the past 12,000 years, humanity has been guiding the technological development of every species in the galaxy. We've been the unseen hand behind every major breakthrough, every scientific revolution, every step forward. The hologram showed human agents embedded within dozens of civilizations, their appearances altered to match local species through technology that couldn't even comprehend. Scientists, advisors, traders, and explorers, all human, all working to nudge galactic development along predetermined paths. "But why?" The question emerged as barely a whisper. "Because we learned something about ourselves very early in our development," Captain Santos replied, her voice taking on a somber tone. "Humans are exceptional at one thing above all others: warfare. We're not the species in the galaxy, we're not the most creative, and we're certainly not the most peaceful. But when it comes to the art of war, we have no equal." She gestured, and the hologram shifted to show Earth's ancient history. Civilizations rising and falling in endless cycles of conflict, each war driving innovation at a pace that left other species stunned. "We discovered early that if left to our natural development, we would inevitably encounter other species, and well. You would have conquered the galaxy," finished, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. "Worse than conquered, we would have destroyed it. The captain's expression grew grave. Our early war games, run on primitive computers, showed the same result again and again. Human expansion into a galaxy full of other intelligences would result in total extinction of all non-human life within 2,000 years, not through malice, but through our nature. The hologram now showed theoretical projections that made worst nightmares seem optimistic. Human fleets spreading across the galaxy like a plague, not out of cruelty, but simply because humans were fundamentally better at the one thing that mattered in contact: fighting. So we made a choice, Captain Santos continued. We would guide galactic development instead of dominating it. We would ensure that when humans finally revealed themselves, we would encounter a galaxy of allies rather than victims. The species that fought alongside you in the battle, said, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. You've been preparing them for centuries, teaching them our weaknesses as well as our strengths, showing them how to recognize and counter human military tactics. This phase-shifting technology, human innovation given freely. This quantum computing matrices, human design shared openly. Every species you encountered that seemed unusually advanced had been touched by human guidance. The scope of it was staggering. An entire galactic civilization shaped by a single species working in shadow, deliberately limiting their own power to ensure the survival of others. It was the opposite of everything they had done, and it explained why their empire had been doomed from the moment they encountered humanity. You let us exist, realized. You could have stopped us at any time, but you allowed the empire to spread. Captain Santos nodded sadly. We needed an enemy, a threat that would unite the other species and give them experience fighting a superior foe. Your empire served that purpose admirably. The casual admission hit like a physical blow. You used us, the suffering we caused, the worlds we conquered, the billions who died. It was all part of your plan. No, the captain's voice turned sharp. The suffering you caused was your choice. We gave you opportunities to choose differently. First contact protocols that would have led to peaceful coexistence. Trade arrangements that would have satisfied your resource needs without conquest. Cultural exchange programs that could have fulfilled your desire for status without oppression. She activated another display showing records that recognized with growing horror. Diplomatic overtures from species that had dismissed as too weak to matter, trade offers that had been rejected without consideration, peaceful solutions that had been ignored in favor of military conquest. Every species you attacked had been given the tools to resist you effectively, Captain Santos explained. We made sure they knew how to fight, how to survive, and how to call for help when they needed it. The choice to commit genocide instead of accepting coexistence was entirely yours. The weight of it settled on shoulders like a gravitational field. They hadn't been powerful conquerors. They had been test subjects in a galactic experiment. Every victory had been allowed, every conquest permitted only because it served a greater purpose in humanity's long-term plan. The communication delays, he said suddenly. During the battle, your ships coordinated faster than light-speed communication should have allowed. Quantum entanglement networks, the captain confirmed. We've had instantaneous communication across galactic distances for over 8,000 years. Most of our technology is that advanced, Admiral. What your species achieved in 3, we accomplished in less than 2 centuries. Then why? His voice cracked with the strain of trying to understand. Why hide? Why limit yourselves? You could have ruled the galaxy as gods. Captain Santos was quiet for a long moment, staring at the holographic display now showing Earth as it currently existed. Vast cities that housed billions, orbital installations that dwarfed planets, technology that bent the fundamental forces of the universe to human will. Because we remember what we were, she said finally. Before we chose to become better, Earth's history is written in blood, Admiral. Wars that consumed continents, weapons that could sterilize worlds, conflicts where we nearly drove ourselves to extinction multiple times. We know what humans become when they have no equals, no challenges, no reason to exercise restraint. The hologram shifted again, showing ancient Earth conflicts. Nuclear weapons that could crack continents, biological agents that could eliminate entire species, wars fought with such ferocity that they made conquests look like children's games. We chose to become gardeners instead of locusts, Captain Santos continued. To nurture galactic civilization instead of consuming it. It wasn't easy. There are factions among humans who believe we should have taken our natural place as galactic rulers, but the majority chose the harder path. And now the test is over. Your empire was the last major threat to galactic stability. With your defeat, we can finally step out of the shadows and take our place as equals among the community of worlds we've helped create. Absorbed this information in silence, watching the holographic displays cycle through of hidden human influence. Every major galactic development had human fingerprints on it. Every species had been touched by human guidance. Every conflict had been managed to ensure maximum learning with minimum destruction. What happens to the now? He asked finally. That depends on your people's choices going forward, Captain Santos replied. The same opportunities for peaceful coexistence that you rejected before are still available. The difference is that now you understand the true nature of galactic civilization. She stood to leave, pausing at the door. Admiral, may I give you some advice? When we reach space and begin the process of dismantling your empire, remember that humans excel at more than just warfare. We're also exceptionally good at forgiveness and rehabilitation. Your species' future isn't predetermined by your past mistakes. After she left, sat alone with the weight of revelations that had rewritten everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. The Empire hadn't fallen to superior force. It had fallen because it had served its purpose in a plan that spanned. They had been pawns in a game so vast and complex that they hadn't even realized they were playing. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the growing realization that the humans had been right. If their positions had been reversed, if they had possessed humanity's technological advantages, they would have used them to rule rather than nurture. They would have become the very monsters that humans had chosen not to be. The documentary continued playing, showing glimpses of the galaxy that awaited. A civilization where hundreds of species worked together as equals, guided by the steady hand of a race that had chosen wisdom over power. It was everything the Empire could have been if they had made different choices. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled in patterns that now held new meaning. Each point of light represented worlds touched by human influence, species shaped by human guidance, civilizations that existed because humans had chosen to lift them up rather than tear them down. The war was over, but Admiral's education in the true nature of power was just beginning. The Availor had never seen foreign ships in its skis. For 3,000 years, it had been the untouchable heart of an empire that spanned a quarter of the galaxy. Now, Admiral watched from his quarters aboard the human vessel as hundreds of ships from dozens of species approached his world in perfect formation. The sight should have filled him with rage or despair, but instead, he felt only a profound sense of inevitability. After months of education aboard human ships, touring worlds that had been liberated from rule, he understood that this moment had been planned long before his species had even achieved space flight. Captain Santos appeared beside him at the viewport, her expression thoughtful as she watched the peaceful invasion unfold. "The Galactic Council voted unanimously," she said quietly. "Full integration for all worlds that accept the new treaties. No retribution, no punishment, just welcome home." His mandibles clicked with something that might have been bitter amusement. Welcome home to a galaxy we never knew existed. "Your people are adapting faster than we expected," the captain observed. "The surrender of the outer colonies was remarkably peaceful. Most of your military commanders accepted integration without resistance once they understood the situation." Through the viewport, they could see ships joining the formation, not as prisoners or conquered enemies, but as new members of something larger than empire. The sight would have been impossible to imagine just months before. "Captain Santos," said, using the human custom of titles that showed respect rather than dominance, "may I ask you something that has been troubling me?" "Of course." "During our tour of the liberated worlds, I saw civilians who seemed happy, relieved even. How is this possible? We brought them order, purpose, expansion across the stars. Why do they welcome our defeat?" Captain Santos was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "Admiral, do you know what we found when we began integrating former colonies? Every single world had underground resistance movements. Not small groups of terrorists, but vast networks comprising sometimes half the population. Your empire wasn't held together by loyalty or strength. It was maintained by fear and surveillance." The words hit harder than any weapon could have. Thought of the billions of citizens across hundreds of worlds, all living under the rule of an empire they apparently despised. How had the leadership never known? How had the surveillance networks never detected such widespread dissent? You made sure they could organize, he realized. Your hidden agents didn't just guide other species, you helped our own people resist us. We gave them hope, Captain Santos confirmed. For centuries, dissidents knew that somewhere in the galaxy there was a plan for freedom. They didn't know when it would come, but they knew it was coming. That hope kept them alive through the darkest periods of imperial rule. The enormity of human patience struck again. They had spent nurturing resistance movements within the Empire itself, keeping hope alive in billions of hearts, all while maintaining the facade of a primitive species barely worthy of attention. The speed of our collapse, he said, understanding dawning. It wasn't because your military was superior, though it was. It was because our own people were already prepared to overthrow us the moment they had support. A revolution that began the day your scouts first detected human signals, Captain Santos agreed. We just gave them the signal they had been waiting for. A communication alert chimed, and the captain activated the holographic display. A face appeared, but not one recognized from the old military hierarchy. This was a civilian, one of the planetary governors who had declared independence in the first wave of defections. Captain Santos, this is Governor Al of Prime. We're ready to begin the integration ceremony. The population is eager to proceed. Governor Al remembered him as a loyal administrator who had never shown the slightest hint of dissent. Yet here he was, clearly comfortable working with humanity, speaking as if cooperation with the enemy was the most natural thing in the galaxy. How long, asked after the transmission ended, how long had he been working with you? 17 years, Captain Santos replied. Though he didn't know it at first, we have a very subtle recruitment process for potential allies within oppressive governments. Small acts of kindness towards subjugated populations, resistance to the worst orders, protection of civilians during military operations. We watched for those signs and gradually made contact with individuals who showed the right qualities. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The Empire hadn't just been defeated. It had been systematically hollowed out from within, its own administrators turned into unwitting agents of change. The war hadn't lasted days. It had lasted decades, fought on battlefields the military command never knew existed. Your own records show the pattern, Captain Santos continued, calling up files that made blood chill. Decreased efficiency in civilian oppression, increased accidents that benefited resistance groups, supplies that mysteriously ended up in the hands of dissidents. For 20 years before open contact, your empire was being managed by people who worked for us. The scope of human intelligence operations was beyond anything had imagined possible. They hadn't just prepared for war. They had won it before the first shot was fired, by turning the empire into an instrument of its own destruction. We're receiving clearance to land, Captain Santos announced as new displays showed docking procedures beginning on the planet below. The Integration Council wants to meet with you, Admiral. They're hoping you might provide insight into military personnel who could be trusted with positions in the new planetary defense forces. New defense forces. Every world that joins the Galactic Federation receives protection and the right to maintain reasonable defensive capabilities. Many former military officers are finding new purpose in these roles, protecting their homes instead of conquering others. The concept was alien to everything understood about military service. In the Empire, the military existed to expand and control. The idea of soldiers whose only job was to protect their own people seemed almost naive. As their shuttle descended toward Ayler's capital city, watch the streets through enhanced. Massive crowds had gathered, but not to mourn their empire's defeat. They were celebrating. Civilians danced in the streets alongside representatives of species they had been taught to consider inferior. Children who had grown up under imperial propaganda were playing with alien visitors as if differences in biology meant nothing at all. How do you do it? He asked, watching a child share some kind of food with a diplomat whose species had been portrayed as monsters in imperial media. How do you make peace look so easy? It's not easy, Captain Santos replied, her voice carrying the weight of experience. Every species integration involves years of careful work, education, counseling, and patience. But humans learned something very important in our own history. Peace is much harder to build than war, but it's infinitely more rewarding to maintain. Shuttle landed in what had once been the Imperial Command Plaza. where military might was displayed during ceremonial parades. Now it hosted a festival that celebrated the diversity of galactic civilization. Food vendors from a dozen worlds served delicacies to anyone who wanted to try them. Musicians from different species collaborated on compositions that no single race could have created alone. Artists displayed works that blended techniques and perspectives from across the galaxy. "This is what we've been building toward for 12,000 years, Captain Santos said as they disembarked. Not human dominance, not even human leadership, but genuine cooperation between equals, every species contributing their unique strengths to something greater than any of them could achieve alone." Admiral was led through crowds that should have been hostile, but instead seemed curious about the former military commander of their oppressors. Several civilians approached him directly, not with anger or hatred, but with questions about what he had learned during his time with the humans. At the Integration Council chambers, he met with the new leadership of space. Former dissidents, reformed military officers, civilian administrators who had somehow maintained their integrity through decades of imperial rule, and human advisors who worked openly instead of in shadow for the first time in. "Admiral," said council leader, a female who had once been imprisoned for opposing military expansion, "we understand you've been studying human history and methods. We hoped you might help us understand something. How do we ensure this transformation is permanent?" The question caught him off guard. I'm not certain I understand." "The Empire lasted 3,000 years because it was built on fear and force," explained. "This new civilization offers freedom and cooperation, but freedom is harder to maintain than oppression. Cooperation requires more effort than domination. How do we make sure our children choose the harder path?" Looked around the chamber at faces that represented the future of his species. Former enemies working together, military officers serving civilian leadership, administrators who prioritized citizen welfare over state power. It was everything the Empire could have been if they had made different fundamental choices. "Education," he said finally, thinking of the months he had spent learning human history and philosophy. "Not just technical education, but moral education. Teaching each generation why these choices matter, what the alternatives look like, and what the cost of returning to the old ways would be." "Human educational methods," added Dr. James Reeves, the human anthropologist assigned to help with integration. "We've learned that lasting change comes from understanding, not indoctrination. Teaching people to think critically, to question authority, to value individual dignity alongside collective welfare." Nodded thoughtfully. "And if some of our people resist, if they long for the days of imperial glory?" Dr. Reeves and Captain Santos exchanged glances. "We've dealt with that challenge within human society for," Dr. Reeves said. "There are always those who believe that might makes right, that strength justifies oppression. The solution isn't to suppress those voices, but to demonstrate constantly that cooperation produces better results than domination." "Show them the numbers," Captain Santos added. "Quality of life indices, technological advancement rates, artistic achievement, scientific discoveries. Every metric shows that cooperative civilizations outperform oppressive ones in the long term. Make the choice obvious through evidence rather than force." As the discussion continued, found himself contributing ideas based on his unique perspective as both a former imperial leader and a student of human methods. He understood the temptations of power and the psychology of those who wielded it. That knowledge, combined with human insights into building sustainable peace, could help ensure that the transformation was permanent. Hours later, as the integration planning session ended, Admiral stood again at a viewport, this time looking out at his transforming in real time. Construction crews from multiple species worked together to convert military installations into schools, hospitals, and research facilities. Former imperial monuments were being replaced with gardens and gathering spaces where different species could meet as equals. "Admiral," Captain Santos said, approaching with a document tablet, "the Integration Council has made you an offer. They want you to head up the new defensive force, reporting directly to civilian authority and operating under Galactic Federation rules of engagement." Stared at the tablet, understanding that this was more than just a job offer. It was a chance to help his people learn a new way of being in the galaxy, to use his knowledge of military affairs to protect rather than conquer, to serve something greater than imperial ambition. "Why?" he asked. "After everything the Empire did, everything I personally commanded." Because you understand both sides now, Captain Santos replied. You know what we were and what we can become. That perspective will be invaluable in helping your people navigate this transition. Looking out at the celebration continuing in the streets below, watching species that had been enemies for learning to be friends, Admiral realized that the war they had declared on humanity had indeed been their final mistake. But that mistake had led to something no one could have predicted, not destruction, but transformation into something better than they had ever imagined possible. The Empire was dead, but the people were more alive than they had been in 3,000 years. The humans had won their war not through superior firepower, but through superior wisdom, understanding that true victory meant turning enemies into allies, oppressors into protectors, and an empire of fear into a civilization of hope. As Admiral accepted command of forces dedicated to protection rather than conquest, he understood that he was witnessing the birth of a new galaxy, one where strength served justice, where technology served life, and where the greatest warriors were those who chose to build rather than destroy. The final mistake had become the first step toward redemption,